In the heart of a picturesque suburban neighborhood, where picket fences lined perfectly manicured lawns, lived Alex, a devoted parent with a zest for outdoor fun. The sun shone brightly on this particular Saturday afternoon as Alex set up a makeshift playground in their spacious yard, filled with laughter and the excited shouts of children. Nearby, the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the sound of chirping birds, creating an idyllic backdrop for family bonding. However, not everyone shared in the joy of this vibrant scene. Across the street resided Mrs. Thompson, a longtime resident known for her strict adherence to neighborhood etiquette. She peered through her lace curtains, her expression a mix of disapproval and irritation as she watched Alex's kids play animatedly. To her, the joyous noise was an unwelcome disruption to her carefully maintained peace. As Alex engaged with their children, blissfully unaware of the brewing storm, Mrs. Thompson's simmering frustration began to take shape into something more sinister, a resolve to restore what she believed was the sanctity of her quiet neighborhood. The stage was set for a confrontation that would ripple through the community and challenge the very essence of neighborly coexistence. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, Alex remained oblivious to Mrs. Thompson's growing agitation. The children giggled and chased each other around the yard, their laughter ringing out like music. It was a moment of pure joy, yet it was about to shatter the fragile peace of the community. Mrs. Thompson, unable to contain her frustration any longer, marched across the street, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. As she approached, Alex noticed her determined stride and paused mid-laugh, sensing a confrontation was imminent. "Excuse me," Mrs. Thompson began, her tone clipped and formal, "but could you please keep it down? The noise is quite disruptive." Alex was taken aback, momentarily speechless. "Disruptive? They're just playing," Alex replied, trying to keep their voice calm. "It's a beautiful day for kids to enjoy themselves." But Mrs. Thompson's expression hardened as she insisted, "There are limits. This is a neighborhood, not a playground." Her eyes flickered with a mix of indignation and authority that sent an uneasy shiver through Alex. The tension hung thick in the air as both neighbors stood firm in their beliefs, unaware that this encounter would set off a chain of events neither could foresee. In the days that followed their confrontation, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted. What had once been a friendly community began to feel divided, with whispers circulating about the rift between Alex and Mrs. Thompson. Each afternoon, as Alex and the kids played outside, they could sense the tension thickening like a storm cloud overhead. Mrs. Thompson took to her routine with renewed fervor, often seen tending to her garden while casting wary glances across the street. It was clear that her irritation had deepened. She documented every instance of laughter, every squeal of delight, as if building a case against what she deemed excessive noise. Meanwhile, Alex tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for their children, encouraging them to play freely while remaining ever watchful of Mrs. Thompson's reactions. Friends and other neighbors began to pick sides unwittingly, some defending Alex's right to let children be children while others sympathized with Mrs. Thompson's desire for tranquility. The once unified bloc now appeared fractured, with the invisible lines drawn firmly in place. As tensions grew, the community braced for an inevitable explosion, a moment where differences would collide dramatically, and the resolution of this conflict seemed increasingly uncertain. The following Saturday, the sun shone brightly again, and Alex was determined to make the most of the weekend, setting up a small obstacle course for the kids. The air was filled with giggles and playful shouts as children dashed around, their excitement echoing through the neighborhood. But as the laughter grew louder, so did Mrs. Thompson's resolve. With a firm set to her jaw, she made her way across the street once more. This time, her demeanor was even more confrontational. "Alex, this has gone too far," she declared, marching up to the edge of the yard. "I've tried to be patient, but I can't take this noise any longer. It's disrupting my peace." Alex felt their heart race, caught between wanting to defend their family and wishing to avoid further conflict. "We're just letting the kids be kids," they replied, trying to keep their voice steady. "It's a Saturday afternoon. They deserve to play outside. Mrs. Thompson's eyes narrowed as she retorted, "Your children's joy shouldn't come at the expense of everyone else's comfort." Tension crackled in the air as both neighbors stood their ground, each convinced they were in the right. Little did they know that this heated exchange would soon escalate beyond words and lead to an unexpected and dramatic confrontation with law enforcement. After the confrontation, the atmosphere in the neighborhood grew increasingly tense. Mrs. Thompson, feeling emboldened by her earlier exchange, began to rally support from other residents who shared her concerns about noise levels. Whispers of her grievances spread like wildfire, and soon, a small group of neighbors began to echo her sentiments, believing that Alex's family was undermining the peaceful essence of their community. In retaliation, Alex sought solace in the friendships they had built over the years. They held informal discussions with fellow parents, trying to garner support and explain their side of the story. However, as the divide deepened, some neighbors who once smiled warmly at Alex now avoided eye contact or exchanged terse greetings. The laughter that once filled the air was now tinged with unease. With every passing day, Mrs. Thompson's resolve grew stronger. She meticulously recorded instances of noise and even took to posting notes on community bulletin boards, urging others to consider a quiet hours policy for the neighborhood. The pressure mounted as both sides dug in their heels. Alex felt an ever-growing sense of injustice while Mrs. Thompson saw herself as a protector of tranquility. Tensions were reaching a boiling point, setting the stage for an inevitable confrontation that would involve law enforcement and test the very fabric of their community. One warm afternoon, as the children played joyfully in the yard, the atmosphere was suddenly disrupted by the sound of sirens in the distance. Alex paused mid-laughter, glancing at the children with a mix of confusion and concern as the police car pulled up outside their home. A knot tightened in their stomach. It was clear that Mrs. Thompson had escalated her complaints to a new level. Two officers stepped out of the car, their expressions neutral but alert. Alex approached them, trying to maintain composure despite the rapid heartbeat echoing in their chest. "Is there a problem, officers?" they asked, their voice wavering slightly. "We received a call about excessive noise coming from this residence," one officer explained, glancing around at the vibrant scene of children running around with smiles on their faces. "Can we speak to you for a moment?" Alex felt a wave of frustration wash over them. "This is my yard, and my kids are just playing." "I didn't think it would come to this," they replied, gesturing toward the children who were now peeking curiously at the officers. The officers exchanged glances, caught in a situation that felt increasingly absurd yet serious. As they engaged in conversation with Alex, it became clear that this was not just about noise, it represented deeper issues of community dynamics and differing values. The air was thick with tension as everyone awaited a resolution that could either deepen divisions or pave the way for understanding. As the officers spoke with Alex, they carefully navigated the delicate situation, aware that emotions were running high on both sides. Officer Martinez, a veteran with years of experience in community relations, took the lead. "We understand that children can be loud, especially when they're having fun," he said, his tone measured. "But we also have to consider the concerns of your neighbor." Officer Nguyen nodded in agreement, adding, "It's our job to ensure that everyone feels safe and comfortable in their homes. We don't want to escalate things further than necessary." Both officers exchanged glances, recognizing the absurdity of having to mediate a dispute over children playing in a yard. As they listened to Alex's side of the story, they could feel the frustration and urgency behind each word. They understood that this wasn't just about noise, it was a clash of values, freedom versus conformity, joy versus tranquility. Officer Martinez leaned closer to Alex and said, "Let's see if we can find a compromise here. Maybe you could establish some designated play hours that work for everyone?" The suggestion hung in the air, a glimmer of hope amidst the tension. Yet Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this conflict ran deeper than mere noise complaints, a reflection of societal shifts and the challenges of modern community living. The officer's perspective opened a door for dialogue, but would it be enough to bridge the growing divide? As news of the police visit spread through the neighborhood, reactions began to ripple among the residents. Some neighbors were sympathetic to Alex, recalling their own childhoods filled with laughter and play. They expressed their concern over Mrs. Thompson's rigid stance, feeling that it was unreasonable to expect children to be silent while enjoying their youth. "Kids need to play," one neighbor remarked during a backyard barbecue, shaking their head in disbelief at the situation. However, others sided with Mrs. Thompson, believing that she had every right to demand peace and quiet in her home. "It's not fair for them to disrupt everyone," they whispered amongst themselves, reinforcing the notion that community standards should prevail over individual freedoms. A few even suggested that perhaps Alex should consider moving to a more family-friendly area if they couldn't respect the neighborhood's vibe. A palpable divide began to emerge as residents took sides, with some organizing informal gatherings to discuss noise levels and what constituted acceptable behavior in shared spaces. This schism stirred tensions further, with Alex feeling increasingly isolated while Mrs. Thompson became emboldened by the support she had garnered. The community was at a crossroads, and the stakes were rising as both factions prepared for an inevitable confrontation that would either heal the rift or drive a wedge deeper into their once close-knit neighborhood. Amidst the growing tension, Alex decided it was time to take action. They could no longer stand idly by while the neighborhood fractured over a dispute that should have been resolved through communication. Inspired by a desire for unity, Alex took the bold step of organizing a neighborhood gathering at the local park, inviting everyone to discuss their concerns and find common ground. As flyers circulated, reactions were mixed. Many neighbors expressed excitement at the idea of coming together, while others, particularly Mrs. Thompson's supporters, remained skeptical. On the day of the event, however, a surprisingly large turnout gathered under the sprawling oak trees. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as residents mingled, some exchanging uneasy glances while others caught up on lost conversations. Alex opened the gathering by sharing their perspective about the importance of play and community joy. They acknowledged Mrs. Thompson's concerns but emphasized that children's laughter should not be viewed as a nuisance. As discussions unfolded, many residents began to share their own stories about noise, both joyful and disruptive, and how they had navigated similar challenges in their lives. The turning point came when Mrs. Thompson herself arrived, visibly hesitant but determined to engage. As she listened to the heartfelt stories from her neighbors, a flicker of understanding began to soften her stern demeanor. This moment marked the beginning of a dialogue that could potentially heal the rift and reshape their community dynamics for the better. As the gathering unfolded under the dappled sunlight of the park, a palpable sense of anticipation filled the air. Neighbors, some familiar and others strangers, took their seats on picnic blankets and folding chairs, creating an impromptu circle. Alex stood at the forefront, their heart racing as they prepared to address the crowd. "Thank you all for coming today," Alex began, their voice steady yet filled with emotion. "We're all here because we care about our community, but we also have different perspectives on what that means." The crowd listened intently as Alex spoke about the joy of childhood play and the importance of laughter in their lives, a sentiment that resonated deeply with many. Mrs. Thompson sat quietly at the edge of the circle, her expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. As speakers shared their own experiences, some recounting cherished memories of their children playing freely while others expressed their need for quiet, an unexpected shift began to take place. Gradually, Mrs. Thompson found the courage to speak up. "I understand that children need to play," she said, her voice quivering slightly. "But I also worry about maintaining peace." Instead of facing backlash, her honesty opened the floor to further discussion. Neighbors began brainstorming solutions together, proposing designated play hours and community events that could foster joy without infringing upon others' comfort. Laughter mingled with serious conversations as walls started to break down, paving the way for renewed connections and a shared sense of understanding. This gathering was not just about resolving a conflict, it was about rebuilding a community that had almost lost its spirit. As the discussions continued in the park, a sense of collaboration blossomed among the neighbors. Ideas flowed freely as they brainstormed ways to accommodate both the need for lively play and the desire for peace. They proposed a community play schedule, which would outline specific hours when children could enjoy their outdoor activities without disrupting others. This way, families could plan for joyful noise while respecting Mrs. Thompson's wish for quieter times. Mrs. Thompson, visibly moved by the collective spirit of compromise, suggested organizing neighborhood events that encouraged interaction and fun, like weekend barbecues or movie nights in the park. Her proposal was met with enthusiastic applause, signaling a shift in her role from adversary to ally. Over the following weeks, the community embraced these new guidelines. Children played joyfully during designated hours while neighbors took turns hosting gatherings that fostered connection. Laughter and camaraderie replaced tension, as those once divided now bonded over shared meals and stories. Alex and Mrs. Thompson found themselves chatting regularly, their initial confrontation transformed into a budding friendship built on mutual respect. The neighborhood had not only resolved the conflict but had revitalized its sense of community. As Alex watched their children play alongside others, they felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude, knowing they had all come together to create a more harmonious environment for everyone. As the weeks turned into months, the neighborhood transformed in ways Alex had never imagined. Children's laughter became a familiar soundtrack, echoing through the streets at designated playtimes, while parents gathered on porches and in yards, sharing stories and laughter that had once been stifled by discord. Alex and Mrs. Thompson forged an unexpected friendship, often seen chatting over the fence while their kids played together. They shared insights about parenting and the challenges of balancing joy with responsibility, developing a mutual understanding that transcended their initial conflict. Mrs. Thompson learned to appreciate the sound of children at play as a symbol of life and vitality within the community she had once sought to protect from noise. During one sunny afternoon, as families gathered for a potluck in the park, Alex reflected on how far they had all come. The sense of community that had emerged was palpable. Neighbors now looked out for one another and supported each other's families. At that moment, Alex realized that this experience had taught them all valuable lessons about empathy, communication, and compromise. The neighborhood had not just resolved a conflict, they had built deeper connections that would last for generations, a testament to the idea that understanding can flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances. As the sun set on another joyful day in the neighborhood, Alex stood in their yard, watching the children play freely alongside their friends, including Mrs. Thompson's grandchildren. The air was filled with laughter, and the atmosphere buzzed with a sense of community that had been rekindled through understanding and compromise. Reflecting on the tumultuous journey that had brought them all together, Alex felt a wave of gratitude wash over them. What had begun as a bitter conflict over noise had evolved into a powerful lesson about empathy and communication. The experience had highlighted the importance of listening to one another and recognizing that everyone has their own perspective and concerns. In this newfound harmony, neighbors no longer viewed each other through the lens of suspicion but as allies in creating a nurturing environment for their children. The events that unfolded had not only resolved a dispute but had strengthened friendships and fostered a deeper sense of belonging. As Alex smiled at the scene before them, they realized that sometimes, it takes a conflict to reveal the threads that bind a community together. The laughter of children echoed in the background, a sweet reminder that joy can emerge from even the most challenging circumstances, creating lasting connections that would endure for years to come.